Event Horizon wasn't built to be ordinary. It was shining in space. But behind the screams and the shadows, it was damnation on every level. The cut no one was meant to see casting from another realm and a black hole that swallowed more than light. These are 20 weird facts about Event Horizon, and hidden inside the ship and the silence, was Hellraiser adrift in orbit. The critics turned away, but the cult dragged it back from the abyss. Number 1. Event Horizon was never supposed to be a rush job. Paul W.S. Anderson imagined years to design his haunted house in space, carefully building dread and detail. Then James Cameron's Titanic changed everything. Paramount delayed Cameron's epic from July to December 1997, leaving a giant hole in their summer slate. Their solution was brutal. Shove Event Horizon into the slot and demand Anderson deliver a $60 million spectacle in just 10 months from greenlight to final cut. Sets were hammered together in weeks. Actors rehearsed while sawdust still floated in the air. Visual effects were sketched and rendered at breakneck speed, with entire shots locked before the paint was even dry. Anderson was given 6 weeks total, less time than most directors spend just polishing sound. The result was jagged and uneven. A movie stitched together under impossible pressure. And the real tragedy, Anderson's original vision, a longer, more terrifying director's cut, was sacrificed. What could have been his masterpiece was cut down before it ever had a chance to breathe. In the end, it wasn't a black hole that devoured Event Horizon. It was Titanic. Another doomed ship that swallowed everything around it. Number 2. Paul W.S. Anderson's first cut of Event Horizon wasn't just longer. It was unbearable. Running 130 minutes, it shocked even hardened horror fans. Test audiences fainted. Studio execs fled. Screenings. One viewer reported live-vomited in the aisle. What broke them? Where the hell were the flashes filmed in stolen weekends with a skeleton crew? Grotesque orgies, mutilations, and visions of damnation. And so vivid they barely looked staged. Paramount panicked. They slashed the film down to 96 minutes, ripping out entire sequences and softening the violence. Fans begged for the director's cut for years, but the footage was gone. Some reels were stored in a transient salt mine and rotted away. Others survived only as damaged VHS tapes used for rough edits. The nightmare version of Event Horizon became an urban legend. What remains are fragments, cursed glimpses of the most terrifying film Hollywood never allowed to exist. The ultimate irony. A story about a ship carrying visions of hell ended up losing its own to time. The scariest cut of all is the one no one will ever see. Number 3. The horrors of Event Horizon weren't confined to the script. The costumes were torture. Chambers in disguise. Each spacesuit weighed over 65 pounds with rigid backpacks that made sitting impossible. Actors couldn't stand for long either, so the crew bolted poles into the floor for them to lean against like mannequins between takes. Sweat pulled inside the helmets, fogging the visors, and choking out air. What looked sleek and futuristic on screen felt medieval behind the camera. Lawrence Fishburne tried to keep morale up, even jokingly naming his suit Doris. But the laughter didn't erase the misery. Cast members endured strained backs, bruised shoulders, and dizzy spells from heat. Moving through the narrow sets became punishment. Every step of the fight against gravity and exhaustion. Shooting a single scene required Herculean stamina just to stay upright. In a film obsessed with suffering, the irony was brutal. The first victims of Event Horizon weren't swallowed by black holes or visions of hell. They were the actors themselves, crushed by the weight of their own costumes. Number 4. The Event Horizon wasn't designed like a ship. It was built like a cathedral. Production designer Joseph Bennett turned to Gothic architecture, modeling corridors after Notre Dame. Cross-shaped doorways, vaulted arches, even stained glass patterns of steel created a ship that felt more haunted than engineered. Every surface carried symbols. The drive the core was a spinning altar of spikes. Echoing medieval torture devices. Shadows fell like church pews across the walls. As if the crew had stumbled into a place of worship. Only the god here wasn't salvation, but suffering. It gave the ship a presence no CGI could match. The Horizon didn't just house evil. It looked like it had been built for it. Floating in space. It wasn't technology at all. It was a church of pain drifting toward damnation. Number 5. Casting Event Horizon was like glimpsing a parallel universe. One where the face on the bridge could have belonged to Hollywood legends. For Captain Miller, Paramount courted Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, even Tommy Lee Jones. Each would have turned the rescue mission into a different kind of film. Willis as the bruised everyman, Schwarzenegger as an unstoppable juggernaut, Jones as a grizzled veteran. But none of them signed on. Instead, the role went to Lawrence Fishburne, who gave Miller a calm authority and moral weight. 2 years later, he would redefine science fiction again as Morpheus in The Matrix. Dr. Weir followed a similar path. Bill Pullman and Scott Glenn were both considered, but both passed. The part fell to Sam Neill, still fresh from Jurassic Park. His unraveling into madness gave the film its most chilling edge, echoing his earlier role as Damien and Omen 3 with his haunted and controlled stair descent. Neill turned Weir into more than a villain. He became the film's beating heart of dread. Looking back, it's eerie to imagine what might have been. A Schwarzenegger action film, a Pullman-helmed tragedy. Instead, Event Horizon became what it is because of the cast. It got actors who grounded the cosmic horror in something human and made the nightmare believable. Number 6, for Sam Neill, playing Dr. Weir wasn't just another role. It was a plunge into something that shook him to the core. The makeup team covered his face in grotesque prosthetics, skin torn open, eyes sewn shut, veins running like black rivers beneath. Hours in the chair left him staring at a reflection that barely resembled a man. Neill later admitted it unsettled him in ways dinosaurs never did. Jurassic Park had made him run from monsters. Here the monster was himself. Looking in the mirror each day meant confronting his own body twisted into horror. It wasn't easy to shake off when the camera stopped. That raw discomfort bled into his performance. Weir's madness didn't feel like acting. It felt like unraveling. In a film filled with shadows and screams, Neill brought the scariest truth of all. Evil isn't out there. It's in the mirror waiting. Number 7. Lawrence Fishburne was no stranger to intense films, but stepping onto the Event Horizon, sets rattled him in ways he didn't expect. The steel corridors were narrow and echoing, lit with blood-red glows and streaked with screams from the sound design team testing playback. Walking those halls between takes felt less like acting and more like trespassing in a nightmare. Fishburne later confessed that some nights he struggled to sleep after shooting. The atmosphere clung to him. The constant shadows, the sense that the ship itself was alive. Even as a seasoned actor, he admitted it felt oppressive, as though the set were designed not just to frame horror, but to make the cast live inside it. For a movie about a vessel that drives people insane, the most chilling part may bet it nearly did the same to its captain. Fishburne didn't just perform in Event Horizon, he carried the weight off its haunted steel in his bones. Number 8. When Paul W. S. Anderson pitched Event Horizon, he didn't compare it to Alien or Star Trek. His touchstone was Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. He imagined a spaceship, not as a vessel of exploration, but as a haunted hotel drifting through the void. Endless corridors were shot like hallways designed to disorient, while Gothic arches and cathedral lighting made the ship feel less like technology and more like a shrine to fear. Characters weren't battling monsters. They were being stalked by the ship itself, each corner echoing with whispers and shadows. Anderson's promise of The Shining in space became the film's guiding principle. This wasn't science fiction built for wonder. It was built for claustrophobia, paranoia, and the terror that the real horror wasn't out there in space. It was inside the walls already. Number 9. The earliest drafts of Event Horizon didn't feature hell at all. They leaned on familiar sci-fi terror. Slimy aliens, tentacles, and body-snatching creatures straight out of Alien. It was horror from the outside in. But Paul W. S. Anderson had it. He didn't want another monster movie. He wanted damnation. So he wrote the script, stripping out aliens and replacing them with hallucinations, mutilated crew members, and visions dredged from the characters' darkest fears. The horror came not from something hunting the crew, but from the ship turning their own sins against them. That pivot shifted the film from generic sci-fi thriller into something closer to a religious nightmare, a collision of cosmic science and biblical terror that no one, least of all Paramount, was expecting. Number 10. When Paramount bought the script, they didn't picture hellish hallucinations. They imagined something sleek and marketable. Star Trek with an edge. A sci-fi adventure they could sell with optimism and spectacle. What Anderson delivered was closer to Hellraiser in a bit. Blood-streaked walls, mutilated bodies, and a spaceship designed like a Gothic cathedral. Executives panicked. One even snapped, "We're the studio that makes Star Trek." The disconnect was brutal. Marketing teams didn't know whether to sell it as a blockbuster or a horror film. Trailers promised grand space adventure, but the movie itself was a descent into madness. That mismatch haunted Event Horizon from day one, as the audience who showed up for exploration found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Exactly the one Paramount never wanted to finance. Number 11. The title, Event Horizon, came from astrophysics. The invisible line around a black hole, the point of no return. Fitting, because the production itself became exactly that. Once Paramount locked the summer 1997 slot, there was no turning back. Time, money, even sanity got pulled into its gravity. In search of savings, the studio made a gamble. Instead of hiring Industrial Light and Magic, the gold standard Ofix, they spread the work across smaller UK houses like Cinite and Massillusion. These teams were hungry. Creative and cheaper, but they also had less time, less manpower, and almost no margin for error. Somehow, against the odds, they delivered visuals that still hold up. Twisting drive shafts, collapsing corridors, a ship that looked like a cathedral pulled inside out. For 1997, it was shockingly ambitious. And just next door at Pinewood Studios, history was colliding. One sound stage was Anderson's Hellship, whispering screams through Gothic arches. In another, Stanley Kubrick was quietly filming Eyes Wide Shut. Two visions offerment, one cosmic and one domestic, side by side. The irony. One became Anartaus legend, the other a cult nightmare. Both proved that when you cross an event horizon, whether in space or in film, you never come back the same. Number 12. Paul W. S. Anderson could have played it safe. Mortal Kombat had just hit big, proving he could turn arcade chaos into box office gold. The sequel was waiting. Hollywood even dangled X-Men in front of him. The kind-of superhero franchise most young directors would kill for. But Anderson walked away. He wasn't chasing hits. He wanted something darker. When Event Horizon crossed his desk, he saw the chance to craft a sci-fi horror epic, not popcorn, but nightmares. He called it was The Shining in Space, and believed it called redefine him. It was a gamble that nearly cost him everything. The film bombed in theaters. Critics tore it apart, and his director's cut was lost forever. But in choosing terror over safety, Anderson carved his legacy. The man who could have made blockbusters instead gave horror fans one of the strangest cult classics of the 90s. Number 13, Paul W. S. Anderson knew sound would be half the terror. He wanted something jagged, industrial, the kind-of music that felt like machinery grinding against bone. His first choice, Orbital, the British techno duo he'd worked with on Mortal Kombat. Paramount booked, too niche, too strange. They wanted orchestral grandeur, something that echoed Hollywood tradition. The compromise was unlikely. Michael Kamen, the legendary composer behind Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, stepped in. But instead of pushing Orbital aside, Kamen pulled them in. He fused their electronic chaos with his own sweeping orchestral dread. The result was a score unlike anything audiences had heard. Pounding drums, strings that wailed like screams, and electronic beats that turned hell into a rave. On screen, it didn't feel like Star Trek. It felt like the gates of hell had opened in space, pulsing with rhythm. Critics were divided, but fans never forgot it. The soundtrack became part of the cult. Proof that even in a film torn apart by edits, the music carried a singular vision. It wasn't just background. It was a warning. This wasn't space-adventure. This was damnation on a dance floor. Number 14. The horror in Event Horizon wasn't just in the blood and shadows. It was stitched into the smallest details. Look closely at the crew's uniforms, and you'll see a future rewritten by flags. The United States, the banner no longer had 50 stars. It had 55, hinting at 5 new states quietly added to the Union. Australia's flag dropped the Union Jack entirely, replacing it with an Aboriginal-inspired design, a symbolic break from colonial history. And the British insignia wasn't just the Union Jack, either. It showed a European Union flag with 27 stars decades before Brexit reshaped the real world. These weren't throwaway props. They were subtle warnings that the film's future was already fractured, nations reshaped, identities rewritten. Blink and you'd miss them. But the message was there. Humanity's next, the frontier wouldn't just be space. It would be history itself. Redrawn. Number 15. When Event Horizon landed in 1997, the knives came out fast. Roger Ebert gave it a single star, calling it tasteless and incoherent. Other reviewers dismissed it as nihilistic, overwrought, even boring. The harshest word for a film meant to terrify. Headlines mocked it as a failed mashup of Alien and Hellraiser with none of the brilliance of either. The tone was brutal. Instead of bold gothic horror, critics saw empty shock tactics and gore with no soul. They couldn't believe Paramount had poured $60 million into something so grim. For many, it wasn't just a bad movie. It was a disaster. Proof that Paul W.S. Anderson had overreached after his early success with Mortal Kombat. Audiences didn't protest. They stayed home. For a moment, it seemed the verdict was sealed. Event Horizon wasn't groundbreaking. It was garbage. What no one realized then was that sometimes trash is left in the dark can start to smolder, waiting for a second life. Number 16. With a $60 million budget and a summer releases lot, Paramount expected Event Horizon to soar. Instead, it barely scraped $42 million worldwide. The numbers were brutal. Not just a stumble, but a freefall. By the time the accounting was done, the film had collapsed under its own weight. Branded a financial black hole. The loss stung even more because of what it followed. Just down the hall at Paramount, Titanic was being polished into history. While Anderson's Nightmare in Space was written off as wasted potential. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One ship doomed on screen but triumphant at the box office. The other lost in theaters before audiences even climbed aboard. Paramount moved on quickly, shelving talk of sequels and burying the film under new projects. But the story didn't end there. In the quiet aisles of video stores, the movie started pulling in curious horror fans. What had been a disaster on paper was about to find a second life on tape. Number 17. Paul W.S. Anderson walked away from Event Horizon bruised. Critics had torn it apart. The box office cratered, and Paramount buried the film. For a young director riding high off Mortal Kombat, it felt like the end. Then came an unlikely voice of comfort. Kurt Russell. They met on the set of Soldier is Anderson's next project. Russell, a veteran of Hollywood's ups and downs, listened as Anderson confessed his doubts. The reviews had been vicious. The money was gone. The dream felt poisoned. Russell didn't flinch. He told Anderson, "Forget the box office. This one will live." At the time, it sounded like kindness. A veteran calming a rookie. But Russell was right. Years later, Event Horizon clawed its way back as a cult phenomenon. Russell's words became prophecy. A film dismissed as trash had survived the void, destined to endure in ways no critic could predict. Number 18. Theatrical audiences may have shrugged. But on VHS, the story flipped. Event Horizon slipped into video stores, stacked on shelves, waiting for night owls and horror junkies to take a chance. That's where the transformation began. In dorm rooms and basements, it played like contraband. Bootleg tapes of the infamous deleted scenes circulated at conventions, whispered about as if they carried a curse. College students swapped copies, daring each other to watch the flashes of hell in the dark. The jagged edits and gothic mood, which felt chaotic on the big screen, became unsettlingly intimate in the glow of a tube TV. Slowly, the film found an audience that didn't see it as trash. They saw it as nightmare fuel. By the early 2000s, Event Horizon wasn't a forgotten flop anymore. It was a rite of passage. Horror fans defended it, cherished it, claimed it as misunderstood genius. The black hole that had swallowed Paramount's money had created its own gravity, pulling in a cult following that only grew stronger. In the end, Event Horizon didn't just survive its failure, it thrived in the shadows, one VHS tape at a time. Number 19. Most critics dismissed Event Horizon as trashy horror, but in physics circles, it sparked real debate. The film's fold space drive, a gateway that bent reality by punching a hole through space, wasn't just movie magic. It echoed actual wormhole theory. Journals and classrooms dissected the concept, noting how the science was surprisingly plausible, even if the hell dimension was pure invention. For a movie Makida's schlock, this became an unlikely badge of honor. While audiences covered their eyes at gore, scientists leaned forward, intrigued. The black hole may have swallowed Paramount's box office hopes, but it left behind something rarer. Respect from the very people who study the cosmos. Number 20. 4 years, Event Horizon seemed dead in the water, a costly flop with no future, but its afterlife as a cult classic kept growing louder. Horror fans dissected its imagery, traded bootleg copies, offloaded scenes, and demanded more. Eventually, Hollywood listened. Amazon Studios announced plans for a series, with Godzilla vs. Kong director Adam Wingard attached. The idea was ambitious. Stretched the nightmare into an episodic saga, expanding the cursed ship and the hell dimension it opened. For a brief moment, it looked like Event Horizon would finally claim the franchise life. Paramount once denied it. But just like the lost director's cut, the dream slipped away. The project stalled in development and vanished without a trace. Still, the very fact it was considered to have proved something in 1997 studio never believed. Event Horizon wasn't a failure. It was a seed. And even if it never grew into a franchise, its shadow lingers, proof that some nightmares refuse to die. Bonus fact, Event Horizon didn't just haunt theaters, it bled into gaming. Developers of Dead Space openly admitted they borrowed its DNA. The gothic corridors, the hallucinations, the sense of cosmic dread. The Ishimura felt less like a spaceship and more like the Horizon Reborn, packed with shadows and whispers from hell. Fans noticed the parallels, too. Every flicker of light, every blood-soaked vision carried echoes of Anderson's nightmare. Even as Hollywood buried the film, gamers kept it alive, transforming its failure into influence. In the end, Event Horizon didn't just inspire a cult movie. It spawned a generation of horror games built on its darkness. Event Horizon was rushed, cut to pieces, mocked by critics, and left adrift as a box office casualty. But it didn't vanish, it metastasized. VHS tapes, midnight screenings, horror forums, and even video games, all kept its nightmare alive. What was once trash became a rite of passage, whispered about like a cursed object. Because this wasn't just a sci-fi misfire. It was The Shining in space, Hellraiser in orbit, a black hole that swallowed Paramount's money and spat out something stranger. If this film still haunts you, drop a comment. Tell us what cult classic we should descend into next. Because a failure on paper can still be a phenomenon in the dark.